people from the South going to the North, like he said, we're more earthy. Basically, they were 10 times what you see in front of you,
10 times.
right? So they had that little slang to them, and then they're meeting writers and playwrights, and they created a whole culture
more
that
space to
moved,
grow.
right? That moved the whole country.
Right. What's good, y'all? It's the Demouchets REACT, and we're back with another video. Who we got today, C?
Today we're back with another American reaction. This is a Black History video, so American reaction.
It's gonna be a good one.
Yes, super excited about this video, guys. If you're new to us and we're new to you, make sure you scroll down, hit that subscribe button, and turn on the post notification bell because we're on the road to 100K, and we cannot get there without you guys.
Let's go.
All right, join the family. Without further ado, let's get into the video.
Black Americans changed popular culture forever in the 1920s. The creation of jazz alone was a huge accomplishment, and eventually it found its way into the mainstream, crossing racial lines once thought impossible to cross.
Yup.
If it hadn't been for a complex chain of events, things probably wouldn't have worked out in quite the same way. In this video, I'm going to talk about the Great Migration and the Harlem Renaissance, two separate movements that go hand in hand with each other. Both would have long-lasting effects for both Black America and White America. Cooperation and understanding between white and black had been one of America's most troubling issues for a long time, and around the 1920s, it began to reach a critical point. The Great Migration is the name given to the mass migration of Black Americans from the North to the South, the most common pattern being from the rural South to the urban North. This huge demographic shift was important in many ways and greatly affected American culture and society. It was largely because of the Great Migration that the Harlem Renaissance was able to happen, but I'll talk about that more later in the video. But what caused the Great Migration?
Racism.
Let's find out.
Jim Crow.
So that's going to show you that it was already successful on both parts of the diaspora. Wherever they went, they knew how to handle it. You know what I'm saying? So, but they're going to talk about it. They're going to talk about it, though.
There is a long backstory to the Great Migration, all stemming from the end of slavery at the end of the Civil War. Under Reconstruction, Southern blacks were able to rapidly gain voting rights and became an important section of the voting public. Black officials were elected into office in many Southern states. It all seemed to be going very well. But then Reconstruction ended. Many states in the Deep South slowly dismantled the voting rights for blacks now that they weren't really being enforced by an outside authority. Through the use of clever, exclusive tactics like the grandfather clause and literacy tests, Southern blacks were effectively re-disenfranchised. Though not being officially racist, it was obvious that these tactics were directed at blacks. After the turn of the century, things only got worse for Southern blacks. Jim Crow laws that assisted racial segregation were enacted in many Southern cities. There was also the fashionable trend of the lost cause of the Confederacy. This was basically a nostalgic and rose-colored view of the pre-Civil War South that claimed that enslaved blacks had been happy and content working on plantations, and it was for everybody's benefit that way. This led some Southerners to accuse blacks of being ungrateful, and that the society of the antebellum South was better for them. Of course, those same people also believed that blacks were simpletons and couldn't handle the complexities of a new modern society. The belief in the lost cause of the Confederacy was entirely sympathetic with the Confederate cause, and was widespread enough in the South that it led to more negative developments for race relations. One of these was the reemergence of the Ku Klux Klan, which officially restarted in 1915. By the 1920s, the KKK had reached record numbers of membership. This led to increasing violence and hostility towards blacks, as well as the increased influence of the KKK in Southern politics. Throughout the post-Reconstruction and Jim Crow period, lynching was still practiced, and in fact, the 1920s was almost at the tail end of the era that saw a significant number of lynchings. So, with all this still ongoing in the 1920s, it was not a good time to be black in Southern America. Millions of blacks still lived in the former Confederate states, and more than 40% of the Southern population in this era was black. But without any real power or social influence, they couldn't really do very much. While the liberal ideas of Reconstruction were being implemented, they hadn't wanted to leave, mostly because it was the only home they knew, and there had been a more or less equal amount of social mobility for them in the North and the South. But when that ended, there was little left for them in the South. With the increased voting rights for blacks in the Reconstruction period, they were certainly a force to be reckoned with at the polls. And this was resented by many whites as well as Southern Democrats, who didn't stand a chance against the Republicans in the South. Being the party of Lincoln, the man who freed the slaves, the Republican Party received nearly all the votes of newly freed blacks, which, keep in mind, was nearly 40% of the population. Thus ensued an ugly, racist campaign to disenfranchise blacks yet again.
Whatever they could do to tear them down, boy, they tried their best.
Yes.
Bruh.
Okay, so there's this, it was this movie. I didn't know about this movie, but it was the first, I didn't know about the story until I watched the movie. The first black people to vote in America, they voted Republican. And I watched this movie with you, and the war, like they were having like battles, war, like really going up against, you know, the whites, and it was a white man who was helping them get to the polls to vote. And just seeing that like broadened my eyes, because it's like oftentimes we'll hear from people in our community that would say, "Oh, I'm not voting. My vote don't count anyway." They mess up. They rig
the polls are rigged. They're gonna pick who they want anyway. It's like,
and my thing is, nothing is gonna stop me from voting ever, because ever. Just what our people have gone through in this country, just to vote, we
living in the times, and I feel like it has been played on us for centuries, but we're living in the times where, you know, reverse psychology is used upon us, and is looked up on to where it's like, you guys shouldn't do this, or no, y'all should do this, or, you know, it just doesn't necessarily benefit us in the way that we want it to. But whenever people say they're not going to vote, that's because they have been stripped of their knowledge of what happened and why people was fighting for us to vote. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So,
because I feel like, okay, you have this choice now, but if they took this choice away from you, you'll still be fussing.
Yeah.
You'll still be fussing. Then you'll feel hurt because you don't have that choice. Nah.
I think everything has a play. You just got to get involved.
Yes.
You still got to stay involved.
So that's the lead up to the 1920s in a nutshell. Beginning around the 1910s, blacks had started moving en masse to northern cities to escape the increasingly racist South. This migration continued into the 1920s, and
so this is 1910s.
Yeah, so they're going to the north right now because of the lynchings and the killings and the racism, and they're tired of it, bro. They're just trying to live a peaceful life and stay out the way.
Right. So this is about 50 years after slavery. About 50 years.
Still being attacked.
My people clean up well, though. Look at them.
Yeah. And then I like how he's put at the very beginning how this, what they did, the Renaissance, was they impacted the black community and the white community, right? And I felt like the music was one thing that did unify people, too. So when they heard it, they was like, I just can't help but move, girl.
Right. And we're not even to Motown yet.
We ain't even to Motown yet, you feel me?
Most popular destinations was the Harlem district in New York. This would become the headquarters of the important cultural developments in the black community in the near future. The increased concentration of black intellectuals and artists led to a faster spread of ideas and an increased output of works. At first, this flourishing of black culture and thought was dubbed the New Negro Movement, but was later called the Harlem Renaissance because of that area's importance in the movement. Hundreds of thousands of Southern blacks had now joined the relatively better-off Northern blacks, creating higher concentrations of black Americans in northern cities and establishing their own communities that often took up entire sections of those cities. This is a generalization, but think of it kind of like this.
Make me feel proud.
Within the Harlem Renaissance figures, those who were already in the North were the intellectual type, and those from the South were more earthy, though they brought with them new, innovative, and accessible developments in the arts. Like I said, it's a generalization, so don't think it was such a straight dividing line.
Yes, he is generalizing, but it's a bit deeper than that. You know, I do have distant relatives who moved to the north, so I don't know them very well. And even some who moved to California, and California is a thing within themselves, you know, in California. What is that movie?
Shot Me in the Pinky Toe?
Shot Him in the Pinky Toe.
With Eddie Murphy?
No, not that, babe.
Oh.
It's a series actually on Amazon. Babe, you gotta watch it. You didn't finish watching it.
Which one?
But it highlights the Great Migration, and I forgot the name of it. And I mentioned this before, and y'all gave us the name of it.
Now I gotta go look it up.
But it highlights the housing crisis of, you know, people who moved from, not just people who moved from the South, but people who moved from the South to California, and other, you know, other blacks in California who were buying homes, how, you know, they were oppressing them in that area. And it's a real good series. Somebody put it in the comment section.
Y'all usually figure it out for us. So when y'all do it, I'm going to go back and finish watching it, since I ain't finished watching it.
Yeah, you didn't finish watching it.
I got to go check it out. We can watch it together.
Yeah.
To illustrate that last explanation, let's take a quick look at two of the most important black musicians of this time, Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington.
Yes.
Ellington had been born and raised in the North and was sophisticated, suave, and reserved.
Okay, so I didn't finish saying what I was saying about the housing crisis. So when you have, you know, families who break off, or friends who break off from the pack, right?
Mm-hmm.
And move to the North, where, you know, the North already had some free states.
Yeah, it's booming up there.
Right, it's booming. The people are, you know, they're more integrated in where they live.
Yep.
And when you have people who leave and go have a better life, you'll have some bickering. That will create a divide. Just like there's a divide between Africans and African Americans, there was a divide between, you know, North and South blacks, right? And it's just a misunderstanding. At the end of the day, it's a misunderstanding, and it's a false judgment on someone. But I feel like with people from the South going to the North, like he said, we're more earthy.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, they were 10 times what you see in front of you,
10 times.
right? So they had that little slang to them, and then they're meeting writers and, you know, playwrights, and they're created a whole culture,
more
that
space to grow.
Right, that moved the whole country.
Right.
Like, this was my favorite unit to study in history. Favorite unit.
It kind of goes, dang, because you were speaking and I had it, but I kind of forgot it. No, because I'll be letting you do your thing.
Sorry,
but,
baby.
Yeah, I forgot it.
Sorry.
Armstrong, on the other hand, was brash, loud, outwardly friendly, and spoke with a drawl.
And he from Louisiana.
But both made very important contributions to black music. The two types of people they represent brought their own unique creativity to the table. They needed each other in order to break through racial barriers.
Right.
Once the innovative ideas of the rural blacks were tweaked by the intellectual blacks, they might then be ready to be digested by the mainstream white public. This is also a generalization, but hopefully you get my point. Essentially,
I don't like that he says
it's a generalization.
Rural and intellectual. I don't like that he said that, because that's implying that, you know, Southerners were not intellectual or didn't have the capabilities of being intellectual. But I understand his plight. His plight is that, you know, they had better lives up there in the North.
But that don't change the idea aspect that that was lower than, just because it was in the South. It kind of go back to the other times in history, whatever, they were saying that people was inferior, right, because of their education. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of like what he's saying.
It is, and it's terms like that furthers the divide, you know, and I just don't like that term. I mean, you know, we're dealing with Jim Crow. Although we're from the South, we didn't live during those times. You know, these people were fresh out of slavery. So calling people from the North intellectuals and calling people from the South rural, I just don't, I don't like that, because I consider myself an intellectual, and I'm from the South. I understand what you're saying. I just
not
feel
that.
I just don't like those terms.
Well, you got to think about it as well, too. Whenever they would move to the North, you know what I'm saying, to be better and develop themselves, they still had to. A lot of the people's jobs back in the day was to paint them, the journalists was to paint them a bad image, right? Because they didn't want leaders of the black community to show the way. They had to paint them a bad image so the people in the South wouldn't follow, or the people in the North wouldn't come back and try to paint them a good picture as well, right? So you have these two divides that they're going to always try to keep between the communities, because if you have somebody that's leading you in the right direction, and your name is getting painted over and it's showing the people that you're not a good person, people are not going to follow you.
Right. And I feel like even people today still have that perspective that people from the South are less than or inferior.
Oh, yeah.
I remember we received a comment one day, and I I had to tap in my intellectual side. Like on camera and written word, I'm two different people. Don't play with me when it comes to my words. Okay, so the person said that they wanted Africans to know that we don't all speak in AAVE. We don't all wear hair extensions or braids like what I have in my head. Basically furthering a divide that we have in our community today.
I remember that comment.
Yes, because just because we speak in AAVE doesn't mean that we are uneducated. I'm a person with degrees, more than one, who speak in AAVE proudly. Because who created AAVE? Africans on plantations.
Yeah, they have put people in positions to look down on other people.
Right.
And they have been taught that. They've been brainwashed.
Right.
Brainwashed individuals, so when they do come into the community, they think they're higher than, they're more than, and they're better than people. And that's not the case. We're all equal. Some may know more than others because of the education that was given.
Right.
And it goes deeper.
But when a person look at you, they're going to see me too.
That's a
When these
bar.
two types finally came together, you had the perfect storm for the widespread dissemination of black culture. One really important thing about the Harlem Renaissance was that it was the first time that black artists and intellectuals were beginning to be consistently recognized by a large number of their white counterparts. This certainly didn't mean that they were fully accepted into their ranks, but it was a stepping stone. One of the most important characteristics of the movement was a newfound racial pride. Blacks from the South had been especially beaten down by society and sent to the very back of the social order. But now, elements of black culture were being accepted by mainstream white culture. It felt like progress was being made, and all thanks to black Americans' unique historical experience and the positive innovation that came from such negative circumstances. Now, blacks who accepted their low social ranking by submitting to whites, so-called Uncle Toms, were disdained by the new generation of black intellectuals and were encouraged to have more pride in their race. Blacks had generally thought that this subservience to whites was demeaning and beneath them, but now they felt like they could openly resist that role in society.
I wouldn't have survived back then, baby. Gonna have to beat me.
In the literary realm, a few of the most prominent names were Langston Hughes, James Weldon Johnson, and Zora Neale Hurston.
Zora.
All were writers who dabbled in multiple styles and who tried to bring black culture to the forefront and display all the achievements of black Americans, past and present. Langston Hughes wrote his first poem, The Negro Speaks of Rivers, in 1920 at the age of 17. Even though it predates the real beginning of the Harlem Renaissance, I think it perfectly captures its spirit. I've known rivers ancient as the world, and older than the flow of human blood and human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo, and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. Hughes briefly tracks the history of black Africans from the Old World to the New World. This was the collective experience of black Americans. They were bound together by it. He puts forth that the African race was as ancient as the rivers, as old as the great civilizations, and that it was at least as legitimate as the white race. In the entertainment sphere, of course, there were countless jazz musicians from both sides of the Mason-Dixon line.
That's a Houston.
But outside of them, a few of the most important were Josephine Baker, the famous dancer and singer, Bill Bojangles Robinson, the tap dancer and actor, and Paul Robeson, the singer and stage performer.
All these classics.
In the film world, there was one black filmmaker who was especially important in this period. Oscar Micheaux was important not only as one of the first black filmmakers, but also just as an independent filmmaker who was actually able to achieve some success. He started making films before the start of the Harlem Renaissance, but, like Langston Hughes, was a bit ahead of the curve.
So I like that he said that he was ahead of his time. I feel like a lot of them was, especially when it came to the music, because they was all creating their music without studios, like real setup studios, how we have today, in place for them to really get all their sounds checked and everything. But they was doing it by themselves.
Yeah.
But I feel like the white man ran 10 steps ahead of them and said, let me create space for them to come into my studio place. And now you have these big corporations where people are investing their time so they can be millionaires and billionaires just by, recording a track.
You know what's interesting? Madam C.J. Walker, although she was not an intellectual or a part of the arts or a musician, she was a hairstylist. She had a hair care line, right? I feel like I love how when they brought out her story, her series, that they showed her she was friends with these people.
Yeah.
Langston Hughes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I remember that.
I love how she showed that because it was people like her who gave them, money to push what they were doing.
She have a movie of doing that. I remember that. Did somebody buy her out for her product, or did she just stay successful?
We ain't gonna talk about that.
What happened?
We ain't gonna talk about that.
Oh,
that was a controversial movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no.
Okay.
She ended up taking the lady product and stuff.
Yeah, I know because she was. Well, let's never talk about it. I got it. I remember more.
Away from portraying the problems within black society, such as the quasi-caste system that existed between fair-skinned and darker-skinned black Americans. And he portrayed the suffering of blacks under Jim Crow, which featured prominently in some of his films. But he also made more run-of-the-mill, low-budget films that used the tactics of the Hollywood production system. Michaud's films were also great for exposing black actors to black communities across larger areas than previously possible. Most of the cast for his films were black or mixed race, and these films gave them an opportunity to do normal roles, as opposed to the handful of stock characters usually assigned to black actors in average Hollywood films, those most often being servants, bellhops, porters, and other subservient service positions, as well as just plain racist stereotypes. Michaud demonstrated...
What's our favorite quote on the channel, y'all? What's our favorite quote? I'm trying to remember the beginning of it.
Waiting for you to say it. What's our favorite quote? Y'all go ahead, tell them.
Historians... If the historians tell... Bring out my phone.
Give us a few seconds.
I know it. I just always mess up the beginning.
Before you even thought about it. Like, you gotta have this information prepared to go on. We got people watching this.
Think away. Hold up. Let's see.
3. Yeah, it should be close.
I'm almost there. Wait.
Whoa, that's not the right.
There you go.
Yeah, right one.
Until the lions have their historians. Tales of the hunt shall always glorify the hunter. So let's give him a hand clap. For putting our people in roles that was true to us.
Mm-hmm. Wasn't just a remarkable talent for directing, producing, and promoting his films. And although they were only really shown to black audiences, it was enough to make a significant impact within that demographic.
Yep.
And in the era of the immensely successful and profitable Hollywood production line system of making movies, most independents couldn't stand a chance. So his success was impressive even outside the boundaries of race.
But you know what, brother? You paved the way for Tyler Perry.
You actually did. Mm-hmm. A lot of people, because when you, like I said earlier, when you're a leader, they're going to try to paint your image and make you people follow you. But you did great. You stayed your course and you stayed true to yourself and you impacted millions of black people.
Yes, look at Tyler Perry's studios.
Yeah, real talk.
We had to start somewhere, so let's get that man his flowers.
Mm-hmm.
The Harlem Renaissance didn't start jazz, and it certainly wasn't the first time America had seen a group of black intellectuals. But coupled with the Great Migration, it put these people physically closer together, which helped their ideas spread faster. It gave black people an opportunity to jumpstart their long-awaited push for equality. That is the greater influence of the Harlem Renaissance. The jazz, literature, and art that came from Harlem and beyond are great from the perspective of quality and everything, but from the perspective of that generation of black Americans, they stood for something far more important. They represented a push for equality. They saw their first recognition from their white contemporaries, signaling the beginning of understanding across racial lines. And for the first time, large numbers of black Americans were proud to be black. They were able to see their own contributions to the world without the stain of...
Hold up, brother. We always been proud to be black now. I don't know nobody that wasn't proud to be black.
That's what we said.
We was just oppressed. I don't think nobody was not proud to be who they were. I mean, I know we had some people who was passing and... All right. Hold up.
Consuming their collective memory entirely. The first step to achieving equality was largely a success. The jazz, literature, and art that came from Harlem and beyond are great from the perspective of quality and everything, but from the perspective of that generation of black Americans, they stood for something far more important. They represented a push for equality. They saw their first recognition from their white contemporaries, signaling the beginning of understanding across racial lines.
And I don't think they saw their first recognition from their white support. The black people were supporting them 100% too.
Yeah.
I'm like...
We was with you till the end. But,
And for the first time, large numbers of black Americans were proud to be black. They were able to see their own contributions to the world without the stain of slavery consuming their collective memory entirely.
He said that all wrong. It was proud to be black. You was good until you got to that back.
Okay.
No, I don't think it was necessarily proud to be black because they was already proud. There was more proud to be accomplishing things that have been taken from them for centuries of their lifetime. You feel me? Like they came from a background that was taken from them. So when they come into a place that is not meant for them to thrive and they are thriving anyway, hell yeah, they're gonna be. What?
And I don't necessarily think it was about having recognition from anybody.
Wasn't about no recognition.
It was about excelling in a land that we were suppressed in. Regardless if it was north or south, we were suppressed in this land. Like, we were still a minority in 2023. But everything else was good. Until we got to that point, like, where you going with that?
They fought for a lot of rights, and it's still happening today. We're impacting.
But the Harlem Renaissance was the first step towards what we have in 2023.
Yeah.
And I love this part in the history class because it was the first time that when we talked about black people, it was in a positive light.
Right.
I love that.
Yet, at the same time, whenever you have a group of black people that is thriving in the community and all over the world, because there was in the North and the South doing it. Remember, they came from the South with it. Something always happens, and I feel like what happened after this was the Great Depression. And that's what really took our eyes off of them because people had to figure out how they was going to survive. Right? And they couldn't, pay off, they couldn't pay for these events and go and, support them in the way they needed to because they had to take care of their families and work and things of that nature. So
our people finally had money, and their money was long.
Big facts.
Okay. We hope you guys enjoyed this video with us. Like this video, subscribe, turn on the post notification bell. We have enabled our super thanks if you like to support the channel that way, as well as our join feature to become a VIP member of the channel. Send in your reaction request through our description box below. We'll see you soon.
Peace.